I don't think agents today are good at pretty much anything. Like, I can't use them, right? But we also have to define what is good, right? Because the definition of good varies. So let's say you're preparing financial documents for tax reporting. Reporting up to two decimal places is good enough. If you can, frankly, if you can get that, like, you're gold, right? But if you're doing physics problems, you might need to go 8, 9, 10, 12 decimal points. Along the same lines, if you're booking travel or you're booking a reservation at a restaurant, the risk is low. The precision required is not that high. If your reservation is 15 minutes off, it's okay. But I wouldn't trust it to run air traffic control because the definition of good, the bar for good is so much higher. Are we okay with 90% or 99% or 99.9%? And that varies depending on the application. And at least so far, I don't see any application that even meets the 90% bar.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind with CoinFund. My name is Jake Brukhman. I'm CoinFund's founder and CEO. And today I'm joined by my co-host, CoinFund principal investor, Bobby Beniers. Bobby, how's it going?
It's going great. Hi, Jake. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Today we have with us Lincoln Murr from Coinbase and Ahmed Rashad from Perle. Guys, how's it going?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's fantastic.
Why don't
Excited
we
to be here.
start with quick intros from you guys? Maybe we'll start with Ahmed, and then we're going to ask you the question we always ask guests on this pod, which is what's one thing in crypto that no one is talking about, but more people should be paying attention to? We'd love to hear your answer to that. All right. Ahmed.
Yeah, hello, folks. I'm the founder of Perle. We do highly specialized data labeling, so we extract human knowledge that gets inserted into AI models, applications, agents, etc., etc. Been in this business for quite a while at the scale and Amazon before that. And to answer your question, what's one thing in crypto that no one's talking about and we should be paying more attention to is, for me, it's obvious. It's more human in the loop operations. We have access to massive numbers of people, and we should also be leveraging that to access larger and more global pools of knowledge. This is infinitely valuable.
All right. Thanks, Ahmed. And Lincoln.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Lincoln. I'm the product lead for Coinbase Developer Platform's Agent Kit. Briefly, Coinbase Developer Platform is a set of tools and SDKs allowing anyone to build on-chain in a super easy way. An Agent Kit is a SDK aimed at giving every AI agent access to a crypto wallet and a whole set of on-chain interactions. Our thesis is that every AI will eventually need a wallet to act as its payment rail. And one of the things that I think nobody's really talking about is the fact that crypto's only found PMF in like DeFi, speculation, and payments. So I'm hoping that we'll see some more users and builders start to lean into these use cases to really get mass adoption before working on so many other things that we know crypto can ultimately be used for.
Awesome, guys. Awesome, guys. Welcome. Maybe we can kick off by just talking a little bit about, agents and, what is the difference between agents and Web 2 versus agents and Web 3? Why should this be like a Coinbase project, Lincoln, versus, something more general than that?
Yeah, great question. Generally, for context, an agent, the way I like to think about it, is a sort of LLM that can take an action or a set of actions based on a specific user intent or in a fully autonomous manner. If you talk to ChatGPT, you get some sort of response in text. That's great. But where this really starts to get interesting is when that ChatGPT instance can go off and start to do things on your behalf, whether that be interact with crypto, reserve you restaurants, act as your customer support agent, whatever. Specifically with Coinbase's role in the stack, I view it primarily as the enabler of financial interactions. You can't really give an AI agent access to a bank account, yet it seems very obvious that ultimately all of these agents are going to want to have some access to financial rails to do things on your behalf. Examples include like booking travel, food delivery, all sorts of fun stuff that requires your agents to go off and interact entirely on their own. I think there are some use cases of agents that are entirely crypto based, and especially some more experimental ones as you start to dive into the world of fully autonomous agents that live on chain. It can never be shut down. But ultimately, I think the way the space is going is that everyone will have an agent or some sort of assistant, and whether or not it lives on chain doesn't really matter, but it is going to need a wallet to do all of its interactions with. So that's the whole goal of kind of what we're building.
Thoughts? Anyone?
Yeah, so I agree with Lincoln that I think there's a little bit of confusion also. I like to clarify this. So an agent is something that can act autonomously or based on intent, understand your intent, and do something in the real world or in the virtual world, either one, right? So it can go and buy an asset. It can book you travel. It can schedule appointments schedule appointments and block your calendar on something. But there's a slight difference between a piece of software that can do this based on a set of rules, like my calendar app can book appointments and provide some suggestions, but it doesn't mean that it's an agent. So it can act on intent, it can interpret intent, it can make the best decision to its knowledge based on that, and that applies across the board. Now, what does it, to Lincoln's point, what it applies it to, whether it's going to go and buy some ETH or it is going to book a flight to New York, it really doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ahmed. I think the core feature of agents is agency, right? Like you really want them to be, the way agents make users more powerful is by parallelizing their ability to do things, right? And so if you take that perspective, the base view is that agents aren't really that good at anything today, if they're actually acting on your behalf. I think it's very early. I think I used OpenAI Operator to try to help me organize some crypto data around my tax season. It definitely started like opening up other spreadsheets in my Google Docs and like messing around, and I had to stop it, right? I have used something called Reserve with Google, which is actually a very service which calls up restaurants using AI and books reservations on your behalf. And it actually worked really well. I don't know, but I suspect they might have kind of a human backup there in case the agents like fail. But I don't know. What's your take on that? What are agents actually good at today?
I think it's pretty limited, honestly. And what we've really seen is a lot of these cool demos that get the public excited about the different opportunities that are available. But like, would I give my agent $500 a day until to manage my portfolio? Probably not. There's a ton of risk involved. So I imagine this will be sort of a gradual evolution where we start with these much less risky applications, stuff like reserving restaurants or booking appointments and whatnot. And we'll get to the point where once the proper guardrails are in place and people start to build up trust, we can start to use agents for much more critical applications. But even still, like every single time a self-driving car crashes, it's in the news. And I imagine the same thing will happen with agents every single time they lose money. Even if it happens at a less frequent cadence than what the average person does just based off of human error, it's still the type of thing where like, because it's such a new technology, because there's so much like mystique around it and excitement, it won't really get a fair shot at things until it's absolutely perfect. So I think we're probably years away from that being the case. I'll be quite interested to see what happens as larger tech companies start to do releases within the agent space, like OpenAI's Agents SDK and all of the different agent products that various different companies, Microsoft, AWS, whoever, are working on, and what those are capable of when they're put in the hands of the public.
Yeah. And along the same lines, frankly, I don't think agents today are good at pretty much anything. Like I think I can't use them, right? But we also have to define what is good, right? Because the definition of good varies. So let's say you're preparing financial documents for tax reporting. Reporting up to 2 decimal places is good enough. If you can get that, like you're gold, right? 1 decimal place is actually pretty high precision. But if you're doing physics problems, you might need to go 8, 9, 10, 12 decimal points. So what is good? The definition of what's good really varies. So along the same lines, if you're booking travel or you're booking a reservation at a restaurant, the risk is low. The precision required is not that high. If your reservation is 15 minutes off, it's okay. If the restaurant, instead of booking the branch that's close to you, book the branch that's 15 minutes away, that's also good. It's going to be okay. It's still disastrous, but I wouldn't trust it to run air traffic control. because the definition of good, the bar for good is so much higher. Are we okay with 90% or 99% or 99.9%? And that varies depending on the application. And at least so far, I don't see any application that even meets the 90% bar.
Yeah. No, I think both of you guys are highlighting a really interesting trend. It seems like you think that battle testedness is like the number one thing that's going to bring this kind of nascent technology that we're excited about into like actual use cases that help us day to day. I am curious though, Lincoln, I know you work with some teams that are building agents. Is there actual pieces of infrastructure that kind of help to speed up this adoption curve? Or maybe Ahmed, is it about better data? Is that how we kind of improve the output of these agents? Curious if you guys have thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a few pieces of critical infrastructure that need to be in place before these agents get adopted in a meaningful manner. One is just still the regulatory burden behind crypto interactions, at least if you're talking about the crypto agents. It's very difficult for somebody to build an agent that goes off and does something like orders you food or books travel or whatever if the end merchant doesn't accept crypto. And then we have this once again very large broad problem of a lack of crypto adoption. I generally think that agents are going to be what unlocks this a little bit more. You know, in the short to medium term, maybe your agent has a debit card that it uses to go off and order things from a specific site. Then once that site has meaningful traction of agents coming there and using a debit card or some other type of solution, then you can go and say, hey, you could start saving money instantly if you just accept stables, get on these rails, no change in user behavior required. Then agents will start to interact directly with your site using crypto. As far as just getting meaningful adoption whatsoever of these agents, I think one of the biggest barriers is the place of interaction. I imagine that it'll be quite difficult for any new players to disrupt the incumbents like OpenAI, who already has a pseudo monopoly, or at least a duopoly with Claude and these other sort of chat-like interfaces where users go to with their AI queries. That to me is going to be the biggest unlock, is when these agents are literally shoved in people's faces through stuff like that, Apple Intelligence, those pieces of infrastructure.
Yeah. At one point we talked about a little bit that we keep seeing over and over again is the Wizard of Oz operations. And it's not just with agents, it's even with just traditional AI. And we see it even with sometimes with SaaS actually. And what happens is you are dealing with an interface. And I think Jake, you brought this up with Google's Reserve, where you think you're dealing with an agent, you think you're dealing with an AI, where in reality what's happening in the background is that there's a human in a box. They're in the loop and they're actually completing the work for you. And the hope there for most companies working on those is that we're going to keep doing this, hacking it this way, serve our customers immediately, and eventually we'll figure out the AI, we'll figure out the agent piece. Unfortunately, from what we've seen is in most cases, it never gets figured out. And you actually achieve operational efficiencies that de-incentivize you from investing in the AI ever. So it's both a quick hack and good revenue and good business, but also it's the bullet that kills the business a few years down the road.
Let me take a slightly different stab at this whole thing. So we talked a lot about agency and how, LLMs are kind of early here. And another thing LLMs are really good at is actually just kind of simple automation, right? And, one thing that strikes me is that I think LLMs are smart enough now for automation where intelligence is not really the bottleneck, right? What the bottleneck actually is access to data. It's maybe the structuring of that data, and maybe even the availability of data in the public domain. So what I mean is, for example, we've been seeing more and more projects starting to build knowledge graphs. Knowledge graph is a very old concept. It's when the internet was started in the 90s, the web was actually kind of envisioned as a knowledge graph, but it never took off that way. And what we're sort of seeing now is there's a much stronger potential pull toward that because agents, are seen to be this thing that will get so big and so effective, but they also need a lot of structured data. Think about, if you're asking your agent facts about the world, who was in this movie and when did this movie, come to the box office, and who is the president of such and such a country, and et cetera, et cetera. I think if you structure that data, it becomes much easier for LLMs to produce intelligent automated results. And so agency becomes easier. And that's on the public data side. And on the private data side, like I have a ton of personal data. It's all siloed, of course, across all of these, Web 2 things, Dropbox and Google Cloud and everything else, right? And there's no coherent thing pulling that out and making it available, to my assistant who's an agent. So I'm just curious, do you guys agree or disagree? Is the bottleneck intelligence, or is the bottleneck really actually the ability to get the data that you need?
I personally, and I might be a little biased, but I think the bottleneck is data. It's data in general. It's getting data. It's structuring it properly in a way that's understandable, and then structuring properly in a way that is actually usable for that specific use case. So you think about it this way. If I'm building a personal assistant that needs to learn about a person to be able to perform well, you need to train it first on a whole lot of data. And you need to structure this data and explain to it that this is a calendar, this is an email, this is good, this is bad, etc., and go through the whole process. But then after that, you also need to show it examples of different people, so that it can understand how different people are different, and then help it understand the nuances and the specifics of each different person. So you'll probably need to go through this process quite a few times before you release it out completely into the wild and tell it, Bobby's a new person. Go figure what Bobby wants and likes and handle it on your own.
I think the thing,
quite a bit to get there.
The thing that scares me about this whole space of agents is that there are companies that know everything about me already. And if they were to lean into building these agents themselves, they likely could do that and would have the access to the data. So if we are indeed saying that the data is the bottleneck, I'm concerned that this kind of open internet economy of agents, might face some steep uphills. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I generally think the real value accrual of agents isn't actually the agent itself. That is like a commoditized piece of technology that everyone will eventually have access to. And you make a very similar assumption that you do with block space on blockchains, where the costs of LLMs will ultimately be commoditized and become super cheap. And we're starting to see that happen already. What's really valuable is having an agent be a translation layer between a human who has some sort of intent or allows the agent to be fully autonomous and do something, and the proprietary data and services that it has access to that allows it to perform that activity in a more meaningful manner. I think a great example is there's been an obsession with trading bots and agents that know how to sports bet and all of that in the crypto space. And if you're just building a trading bot using GPT-4, it's going to be garbage. It's going to suck. All it'll do is be oh, Bitcoin's up, whatever, I should buy, even if Bitcoin isn't actually up. What you need is access to some set of unique data through which your agent can start to reason and make more informed decisions, or access to some sort of unique moat or place where the agent can interact that other agents may not be able to get to, that allows it to accrue value.
Yeah, I like the way you're framing it. So you're kind of arguing that the next couple years of agent development is going to be a lot of engineering the different pipes for action items and data inputs from kind of specialized places to build the right suite of tooling that an agent needs to have a good product experience for me as the end user.
Yeah, exactly. Take, for example, some sort of DeFi lending protocol or something along those lines. If you wanted to use that today, you would have to get a wallet, you'd have to fund it, you'd have to connect to the website, understand exactly how their user interface works, go through that whole process. Ultimately, the goal of which is getting some higher yield than you would inside your savings account. With an agent, the process is you fund the account. Maybe it's using some sort of on-ramp like the developer platform has at Coinbase. And you just tell your agent, go off and earn me yield or something along those lines. And that entire process is abstracted away behind the agent who's able to facilitate that for you. So I imagine a lot of development will start to come in the space of how do we make our products more accessible to agents? And how do we do so in such a way that allows us as a service or as a product to accrue additional value, because we're opening up to a wider audience.
I agree, and I wanted to add to it. I think just thinking about the user experience, thinking about all the things we have to do. If you're trading or if you're doing transactions with crypto, it's not the best experience, right? Like it has its own complexities, it has its own issues, it has its own risks. So I agree with Lincoln that if we're able to abstract away that complexity, that in itself holds an incredible amount of value instead of having to go back and redo a lot of the UX that's been there for years, and it's going to probably take a much, much longer time to fix that UX versus abstract it away altogether. It's like going back and trying to fix C++, right? It's not likely, right? Love C++, but just not very friendly.
Nice. Lincoln, I was going to maybe ask you around Base a little bit since you work at Coinbase, and it seems like Base has been an interesting venue for, agent and other like decentralized AI projects. And I was wondering maybe if you could tell us a little bit about that, like what's happening on Base in terms of these things and why are founders choosing Base as the place to do it?
Yeah, it's been amazing to see the growth of AI agents specifically on Base. And it feels like today that Base is the home for AI agents and AI generally within the crypto space. What makes me so optimistic is how supportive the Base team has been of this narrative and assisting teams with, go to market, finding different venues through which they can start to understand a little bit more about their audience, do like help with finding developers or partners and collaborators and all of this, which the Base team I think absolutely excels at. What's great too is like at the Coinbase developer platform, we're not exclusively building for Base. We also support Solana and a multitude of other chains, but we do treat Base as a first class citizen with things like free transfers for agents doing any sort of interaction on Base. We recently introduced like a smart wallet API that our agents can use. So basically the first couple $100s of gas that a developer needs for their agent is pretty much subsidized. So all of these features allow us to spin up a really nice flywheel to keep developers coming to Base and building on top of it. And then along with that, we're recently going to announce something pretty exciting, which is X402. It's basically a payment rail that allows agents to pay for APIs using crypto. I imagine this is going to unlock a lot of really compelling use cases for agent to agent transactions, and further develop agents into their own autonomous being who don't have to go off and grab API keys. They can just call a specific function, get the HTTP 402 status code, which means payment required, and respond with a crypto transaction. So that is going to live on Base first, obviously eventually coming to other chains as well. But these types of things, I think, allow Base to continue to be the hub of agent activity and generally where innovation resides.
Yeah, it feels like crypto payments are almost the native way for agents to transact.
I agree. There's something about the lack of regulatory uncertainty of just a pure crypto wallet that an agent has to interact with. No need for it to use these traditional legacy rails. And what's nice, as we've been saying about this abstracted experience, is that everything should trend towards the like most efficient solution. And for most cases, that's stablecoins on a crypto rail. Even if it doesn't happen immediately, I imagine we'll start to move this way since it abstracts away and hides the crypto rails from being like a front end user facing thing to a simple back end change or difference in details that the end user never needs to see. It makes it so much easier for us to actually start adopting crypto than forcing it onto users and trying to make a change in their behavior with these very entrenched financial applications.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because we hire tens of thousands of experts around the world to give us their wisdom and as an input into AI models. And this is a problem that we often encounter is how do we pay them with broken fiat systems in a lot of these countries? And how you described it is exactly how we're addressing it. And the end user at the end of the day doesn't care or shouldn't even care how they're getting paid. All they know is they're getting paid faster, it's more transparent, it's on time, it's with almost no fees to them. They love it, and then most of them don't even know they're getting paid using crypto rails.
Do you guys, maybe we could talk a little bit about the downsides of agents. Do you guys feel like there's some hazards that could arise from a proliferation of agents? We talked a little bit about kind of DeFi agents. I'll give you an example. Are you guys familiar with AIXBT? Yeah.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
For anyone who might not know, AIXBT is a AI agent crypto influencer. It was the top crypto influencer for a while. I'm not sure it's the case now. And, its job is to sort of surface opportunity is for, by reading crypto Twitter and kind of drawing attention to what projects are doing, to their metrics. It's not, I have to say, in my experience, it's not 100% accurate, but I observed the following pattern. One day, AIXPT tweets, you know what? Miggles is the next Pepe. And everyone's like, AIXPT is saying Miggles is next Pepe. And all these like crypto traders go and they like jump on it and they buy Miggles, and suddenly Miggles becomes the next Pepe. And then they say, oh, AIXPT was right. It predicted that Miggles was going to be the next Pepe. And of course, who's the agent here? Is it the agent or is it the people who are following what the agent is saying? Wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that. Is this actually good? What kind of impact could this have on crypto trading?
Yeah, what's interesting about the AIXBT case is it sort of helps form the narrative that the proprietary data is what gives these agents value. Even if AIXBT's predictions are pretty garbage, which they absolutely are, people think it has value because it has access to all this proprietary data and insights. I think what we've seen over the past several months is this absolutely massive hype wave of crypto AI agents and people who have no idea what they're doing, dumping money into them because it mixes two of the biggest buzzwords of AI and crypto that we've seen in the past decade, if not longer. I really think it's just a consequence of where we are in the crypto market and the fact that it is so purely speculative. What it really reminds me of is back in like 2020, 2021, when Jimmy Fallon was showing Bored Apes on his show alongside Paris Hilton. Like, things have gotten a little bit frothy. It's certainly absolutely ridiculous right now, but that doesn't undermine the value of the technology and where things are going. I think it does start to muddle the waters a little bit, but at the very least, it brings attention to agents. We probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for these agents and people like freaking out about them over the past several months.
Yeah, I think a lot of the agents that I see on social media, I don't classify them as agents per se. I think they're closer to chatbots, to be frank. So they're not really agents. They're not taking an actual action. They're just responding to you or responding to stimuli that happens all around their environment, but they're not necessarily doing anything. And the funny thing with that is, and you mentioned this before, is that with that proliferation of agents with these chatbots, is that I wonder how they would start interacting with each other. Because when it first starts, any novelty, when it first starts, if you remember a few years ago, we were saying LLMs are just going to train other LLMs and we're going to be done in 6 months. And that was a conversation that we were having 4 years ago. The conversation about data when synthetic data first came out was like, oh, we're not going to need any real world data because we can generate all the data we want. Like, that doesn't make sense. It's sure. But we as humans tend to overestimate when we see a cool demo. We tend to get way overexcited and try to imagine a future with flying cars using that specific piece of tech, not try and look at it with any skepticism at all. Like a lot of the coding tools and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is that first, I think agents are still a little bit away from being actually useful. And two, until we have multiple agents on the same field interacting together, it would be very difficult to speculate what the world's going to look like in that area with agents acting in it.
That's a fantastic point. So a funny anecdote about that idea of the agents who interact with one another. One of the first projects we saw built with AgentKit was from one of our developers who put 100 of them inside a Discord server and let them just talk to one another. And he released a token alongside it. And that token reached $20 million. Like, what are we doing? It's a little bit insane how frothy this agent space has gotten. And I think that's just a perfect example of like you said, these are really demo pieces right now. This first wave of AI agents was showing people what's possible in a perfect world and letting them daydream about where they want to go. And now, as we start to see a little bit more of a market correction, people start to slow down, get a little bit quieter. Here's where I'm very optimistic for the next wave of these agents that come in and can actually perform tasks and do things for humans besides being a bulletin board on social media to drive attention to a token.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we've talked a little, we've danced around the idea that like agents may be a way to kind of accelerate adoption of crypto applications that have been like typically hard to use. Have we seen any of that yet? Are agents today bringing in users to some of these kind of harder to use applications, or is that what we should be kind of building towards in the future?
I think that's one piece of where we're going. The Moonwell team, which is a DeFi lending borrowing protocol on Base, they were at one of our hackathons and they released this agent called Mamo, which does all of this yield optimization for the user. And they're gearing up for a release. I'm quite excited to see how that goes. But generally, I think there's still concerns or trust issues between humans and agents and giving them access to real world value. I imagine this will start to change over time, and it's going to be something that sort of forcefully happens. It's going to be one person gives an agent $1,000 and they make a bunch of money. So somebody else wants to do it. And that's how you sort of build up trust, is through FOMO. And I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about it, but I think it's the most realistic of how this will all start to shake out. That's one option. And that's like the pure sort of crypto play. And then on the other side of the spectrum, hopefully, maybe these agents start to use the crypto payment rails in a way that's completely abstracted from the end user. They just deposit fiat through Coinbase on-ramp or something along those lines. The agent goes and does some sort of action with it, and the user doesn't even really have to know it's crypto. So maybe it's less about onboarding users and more about just the concept of providing them with the most efficient rails and a new way of interacting with existing services that provides them an ultimate better experience.
Yeah. I also think I would be very excited, for example, if yes, if you get an agents that can trade on your behalf or try to maximize your alpha on this or that based on these parameters, that would be fantastic. But I'd also be very excited if I see agents trying to solve some of the more obvious use cases that involve things like automatically rebalancing portfolios, things that are simpler than just trade completely on my behalf, right? Manage my portfolio, like just rebalance it, just start with that. Or deal with gas fees, or find the optimal order routing, or coordinate multi-protocol actions, and so on and so forth. Just take some of the burden that happens on the back end and make it not a burden. Become part of the infrastructure that simplifies this whole ecosystem. That will help bring in more people into using Web3, even if they don't know it's Web3. It just becomes part of natural life. Oh, we're using fiat, we're using stablecoins for this one, we're using that, whatever.
Yeah, super low friction yield is what they should be. Users should be thinking about, not quite how they're interacting with it. That's a really important point.
That's why I kind of think like agents have to own, all the modalities, not just the crypto rails, but the traditional credit card rails. And they should not just be able to log in with crypto wallets. They should be able to log into Google as well, because ultimately, like, the agentic part is I can act on your behalf, but in any situation. And then that's why when I see projects around like agentic commerce, we're going to build a blockchain and all the agents will interact together on this one blockchain using this one stable coin, that feels unrealistic, because we're kind of invalidating the agentic value proposition of that.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear on your guys' side. I'm sure you've been getting a lot more pitches as investors around the agent stuff. So what's appealing to you all? Is it individual agents? Is it the infrastructure allowing them to interact with one another, the data pieces? Like, what do you find most captivating about the space in its current state, and where do you see the most investable sectors?
Bobby, over to you.
Yeah, I kind of buried my answer to this question in some of my earlier thoughts, but there's two pieces of this stack that seem really exciting and investable to me. One is the infrastructure answer to the question of like, what brings us from like not very useful agents today to quite like useful agents in the future. Any infrastructure that it can bridge that gap gets me really excited personally. And then the other piece is like, when I think about how this space is evolving, I think a lot of it is becoming commoditized, and from a tech point of view, and you're going to have kind of the founders who win are going to be really good at like building products that resonate with customers in like a very traditional Web2 non-crypto way. The one thing that like won't be commoditized is this kind of personalized data, or you can even call it preferences, like the stuff that makes up like a RAG that gives context to an agent, I think is like very differentiable and valuable for sub verticals of agents. So those are my two areas that I find really exciting is personalized data and, infra to make this have just a much greater TAM of like use cases that could be addressed by agents. Jake?
I think, the way that I've often approached new areas, which I think agents are still a fairly new area, especially in Web3, is through kind of a tech stack approach and understanding, yeah, what is in the lower parts of the tech stack, what is in the upper parts of the tech stack. And I think that amounts to our infrastructure. I think there's going to be a lot of open models. We're seeing that trend. Like it feels like proprietary models for agents is not really kind of that defensible, but there's probably some like interesting infra and services around agents that is important. I'll give you a couple of thoughts there. So one is Bobby and I looked at a couple of projects which are talking about validation or verification. And I don't just mean like verification of, the outputs of the LLM or something like that. The validation or verification of the result of what the agent has done for you. Can we verify that I told my agent to do this? Maybe it's produce a return on my capital at 3% per year or something. Did it actually do that? Like, did it achieve its goal? How do we measure that? How do we adjust if it didn't? So some companies are thinking around that area. But, what other agentic infrastructure might there be? I mean, I think data is a very interesting way to approach the agent space. And I've kind of mentioned this before. What we're now seeing in the market is layers that are open, public, decentralized, long lasting. One of our portfolio companies, Recall, has a product for agentic data, for example, and we might be making more investments in the space of time. Part of that could be, the structuring of that data, as we discussed before. Part of it could be the programmability of that data, right? So you're seeing like programmable data layers becoming more prominent. I think there's a bunch to do in the infrastructure of that space versus, for example, betting on individual agents like AIXBT. And I say that as someone who actually holds some AIXBT tokens anyway as an experiment, but is that the best way to capture the value of this space? And I also worry about like Web 2 approaches here. We mentioned this before. There's certain big tech companies who might have an advantage in terms of your zero-party data and might just be able to build better products there. So how does Web 3 infrastructure counteract that? Are people actually using self-sovereign data, et cetera, et cetera? So overall, Lincoln, I think it's very early in that space. And what I really want to see agents do is become effective in some way, whether that's unblocking their intelligence, unblocking their access to data, becoming more agentic, becoming more, effective in all those ways. And I want to have a clearer picture of what infrastructure enables that. And then I'll be investing in that infrastructure.
Interesting. Yeah.
We also see quite a few agent payments pitches, which are all quite interesting, coming at it from different angles. Not sure it's been figured out yet, but we continue to take a look there and try to figure out how to, it's a problem you're thinking about as well. So definitely one entrepreneurs should be trying to solve.
Oh, payments as in automating away my bills, or payments as in investing?
Mostly just like the payment rails for the agents.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Lincoln mentioned, it's great to have a wallet for self-sovereignty of your agent's finances, but still may have issues, paying an API for data, for example.
Like, how do you get an agent to buy you a pizza? Is it that you're giving it your wallet? Is it getting permission to take a little bit of money out of your wallet? Or does it have its own wallet, which it can use for those kinds of purposes that you gave it? And again, like, big question there is, what rails does that payment support? I can't imagine a world where, two agents come together and one says, I want to buy some service from you and I want to get some change. And the guy's like, well, what blockchain are you on? They're like, I'm on agent payment blockchain. What blockchain are you on? They're like, I'm on Base or something. And they're like, oh, sorry, we can't transact because they're different, So I, really do think agents are going to have to, or these payment solutions will have to like support everything, right? To be truly effective, like to be able to navigate the world on someone's behalf.
Yeah, I agree. It's been interesting to see the sort of like all L1 problem of having a million different stacks on which to build. proliferate through the crypto agent world as well, where you have a bunch of different competing standards to do things like payments, interoperate, verify, all of these various things. It makes the space feel very noisy in some sense. And I think that is in part a consequence of the hype that's come with it. But at the same time, it is incredibly difficult to pick winners and choose exactly which parts of the stack a certain company or piece of tech is going to dominate. And it's the same thing we've seen with all L1s, where like you could have the best tech in the world, but if you don't have the network effects or like the proper incentives or the right partnerships in place, or maybe just another network or another standard has their agent blow up and become the main primary agent, there's a lot of factors in making these decisions that are far beyond just like the technological prowess of a team or the protocol's capabilities.
Yeah, really interesting. One of the early reasons that, all right, maybe I'm wrong in this conception, but in my view, one of the reasons that a lot of agent builders came to Base, especially early on, was because people were launching tokens associated with their agents, and these token prices were shooting up, and it was an attractive opportunity for an agent builder. Obviously, a lot of those token prices have come down in a meaningful way now, but my question to you guys is, should agents have tokens?
That's a great question.
So before we answer, I think do they need to or can they? So
I'm going to leave this really open-ended, so you guys go ahead.
please, Lincoln.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I bias toward no. The reason being is I think it distracts too much from what the agents can actually do. And as we saw with this last hype cycle, like while it did absolutely drive attention to these agents, it didn't really drive users per se. I think that if tokens are serving the role that I believe they mostly should, which is around providing utility to an overall ecosystem or like providing you some sort of unique feature that you get from it, then absolutely have a token. Let it be the thing that is like, if your agent's running a DAO, have it be the DAO token. If the agent does some sort of service, allow you to pay for that service using the token. Like, just give it something. Like, just make it useful. If it's a useful token, then like by all means have it in place. But if it's literally just like a short-term speculative mind share capturing token, then like I don't know what you're doing. You're clearly building for like the next 45 days, 2 months. So it's just impossible to even consider that like legitimate agent project, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it has to. I think it could, if it's needed, if it's useful. So if it's needed and useful, my concern is that having a token next to the agent, especially how early and nascent the agent space is, and it's lacking so many things. Like we're looking at people who are building agents, for example, on data, and their data, they are still discovering what data could make their agent behave better. And it's so difficult. Like even dealing with something like adversarial robustness, it's a nightmare. And with something that early on, doing that while navigating a token could be a serious distraction. So at least until we figure out how do we build agents properly, because they're not doing, like going back to the first question, they're not doing well. They're not having a good time. We're not having a good time with them. I might be having a little bit of a good time, but they're not doing well in the wild. So let's reduce the surface area which we have to solve. And if founders have to solve the token and making this unsolved problem solved, split focus on a very difficult problem.
Yeah, that's a fantastic insight. It feels like tokens, maybe as a consequence of just lacking regulatory structure, are amazing for really one of two things. One is providing early capital to create a flywheel ecosystem style effect that you otherwise couldn't have, or two, allowing sketchy grifter teams to make a ton of money really early without actually having to deliver on any of the roadmap items. So while tokens are absolutely valuable, any sort of hype cycle, we're going to see a lot of that second case where people just come in, extract value, and leave.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for joining us, Ahmed and Lincoln. We really appreciated having you on the show. That was Perle founder and CEO Ahmed Rashad, and AI lead of the Coinbase developer platform, Lincoln Murr. For those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for listening. If you feel passionately that we got it right or wrong, let's keep the conversation going. Leave us a review. Let us know what you thought. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, my handle is @jbruk, JBRUKH. And Bobby's handle is Bobby Beniers, BOBBY_BENIERS. Make sure you download where your podcasts are downloaded, and we'll be back soon to dig deeper on these ideas of the blockchain space. So thank you so much for joining.